Mabuhay! Ako ang inyong kakampi na si Puting Pinoy. Isang puti na may pusong Pinoy. At kasama ko ngayon si...
Josa.
Si Josa. Yep, isa kang Josa.
Thank you.
You're welcome. At ngayon mga kakampi, may special tayong guest na si Jonathan Santiago, isang FilAm na taga California. At ngayon, interviewin natin siya with your questions and answers about stereotypes tungkol sa mga FilAms. And nakilala ko si John sa Video Husky. He's the host of the Video Craft show over at Video Husky, where they interview creators like myself as a podcast. So yeah, let's go ahead at... bago natin siya ipapakilala, let's go ahead mga kakampi, huwag kalimutan na sampalin ang like at sampalin ang kampana.
Mabuhay kayo! Paki-subscribe at sampalin ang kampana.
Alrighty mga kakampi, ito si, let's welcome John to the live stream.
Hello. Kumusta ka?
Okay lang, kumusta ka rin?
I'm good. Good.
So, John, we decided to do this. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for
like
having me
to?
on.
Yeah, definitely. Would you like to give any more background about who you are and what you do, how we know each other?
Yeah. So, Jared and I, we connected because I had seen his reaction video to another friend of his. Some of you probably know as well, Tom Kugler, his YouTube channel, Finding Tom.
Yeah.
The concept of Pinoy baiting. And this was something, even though I'm Filipino American, this was a totally foreign concept to me. I'd never even heard of this until I had come across an article about it, which had Tom's video linked within it, and it was just very interesting to me, and it led me down this rabbit hole of where I was actually finding a lot of creators like yourself who were foreigners that had relocated to the Philippines, and I just thought it was so interesting, and started following your work and connecting with you. Reached out, tried to connect with you, and next things next. We ended up having you on the podcast, which will be coming out in like a month and a half or so. So look out for that. But as far as me, yeah, I'm a Filipino American, born here in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. My parents both immigrated from the Philippines into the U.S. in the late 1970s, early 1980s, from like the Metro Manila area. My mom was from Quezon City, and my dad lived in San Juan, and so they ended up meeting each other here. They did not meet in the Philippines, but they met here and then got together, and then I was born and have lived this interesting life as a FilAm here in California.
Right on. Very good. Well, like I said, we're excited to have you here today. I have right here just kind of a list of some of the things we'll be discussing today. So ito mga kakampi ang mga tatalakay natin. Mga stereotypes about FilAms from Filipinos. Cultural differences, being Asian American, Filipino languages, and your comments. We'll get to your comments throughout this live stream, siguro sa bandang dulo. So please don't go anywhere, and please share this live stream. This will be something I think will be very interesting for everyone to have in discussion. We also have a video na papanorin namin, to kind of kick things off. So we'll go ahead and go with that first.
It's 2007, and we have for you another season
Oops.
of Speak Out.
Are you getting the what's it called on it? The audio?
Yeah, I am.
Their vocals? I'm not getting their vocals for some reason.
I'm hearing it all.
Oh, you're getting it? Oh, okay. Would you mind switching for a moment?
Oh, it's on the other
Okay.
on the other earbud.
Yeah. Okay. I hope we're not going to get copyright struck. We're going
Invited
to.
a group of
Okay,
panelists,
cool.
a larger group of panelists this time. We have 6 on each side to help us resolve this matter.
I really believe that there's a cultural disconnect. There's a gap that needs to be bridged in our community.
It was weird because, you know, you came from a country with there's a sense of bayanihan, they say, you know, they rear each other out. It's like, oh, you know, we're Filipino, we're supposed to be tight, but like, psych, we're not.
We're shy to talk to, FilAms because like, oh, they're English. I don't know what to say.
And so I didn't know how to relate to them. They're talking completely in Kapampangan.
Because if you grow up in the Philippines, you learn both languages, right?
There we go.
The message that I received was that my Filipino-ness was not good enough and that I will not be accepted with my accent and with the way I dress. I have to change myself. In essence, I have to shed myself of my Filipino-ness.
Ano kasi, like, yung respeto kasi minsan wala. Tapos, like, pag pumasok ang eskwela, minsan, like, most of the film, like, yayabang, like, oh, we're better than you.
They expect us to explain the club, our mission statement in Tagalog. They came up, they said, well, we don't think you should call yourself Filipino because you guys can't speak the language.
How are you going to tell me that your Filipino organization, you can't even speak Tagalog? The essence and the foundation of that organization, you can't even explain.
Learning Tagalog at 2 versus 22 is such a big difference.
That's very true.
Just because we want to, improve
Is that when you
our
learned Tagalog?
Americanness doesn't mean we have to
How
get rid
old
of our
you were,
Filipino.
right?
What's that?
That's how old you were when you started learning the
I
language,
was
right?
19
Oh,
years
okay.
old. Yep.
Filipino-ness.
And what does Americanization mean, or what is the American dream, and who is American? And when we think about this, when we think about that concept, most people think of white folks. So if a Filipino wants to be a Filipino American, are you trying to be white, or are you trying to have the ideals of America, of freedom, democracy, and have wealth and privilege? So I think there has to be, a separation between those two.
Let's just reverse the question. What does it mean to be Filipino? Does it mean wearing chanelas in the winter? Does it mean putting our parents in a pedestal,
It's like, hold up. Like, this doesn't make sense. Why are we kind of fighting amongst each other?
What's the role of the parents? Shouldn't they pass on the Filipino-ness by passing on the language?
We tried very hard. We are talking in Tagalog in the house. We are, for some reason, when they goes to school, suddenly, she's
not interested anymore.
Yeah.
I get so upset when I see Americans talk to him like he doesn't understand because of his accent, and I get even more upset when I see FilAms doing that.
I'm from the East.
Do you ever experience that? Do you ever do your parents have accents, and if they do you ever experience a sort of discrimination, or do they experience that?
No, I would say no. From my parents, no. They've actually they still speak fluent Tagalog, obviously, with relatives who also immigrated here. But it's also like they've assimilated and adapted as well. Where when they're speaking in English, like they don't have an accent. I have other relatives, like I know we're talking about FilAms here, but you could kind of throw Filipino Canadians into the mix as well. Just
Sure.
Old North American continent. Like my uncle, I have one of my, I love this uncle of mine, but he's in Canada, in Toronto, and he still has a very hard Filipino accent. Like, and he's been in Canada for what 40 plus years at this point. But I've never seen it as an issue. At the same time, he has a prestigious career as a doctor there, so he's influential in his area.
Okay, cool. All right, let's continue this one.
Coast, and hearing all these stories is pretty interesting because my experience is totally different. I didn't hear the word fob until college.
There's a higher concentration of Filipinos in the West Coast. And because there's not as many Filipinos in the East Coast, American-born are going to gravitate to the Filipino-born because they want to find out more about their homeland.
Is it the fault of the individual Filipino, or is it the fault of the Filipino people collectively who have allowed an American educational system and an American culture in the Philippines that has bred poverty, it has bred self-hate, it has bred out-migration?
So let's be conscious about, about these psychological scars that we inflict upon each other. Let's try to nurture our community by, supporting each other regardless of immigration status.
Be heard, stand up, and speak out.
Very nice, very nice. So I think, in the spirit of that show is kind of what we want to do here today is, sana masasagot ang mga tanong ninyo, and hopefully to help create a little bit more of that, of that camaraderie, of that shared being Filipino, So let's go ahead and dive into this then. We're going to start with stereotypes. Now, this is stereotypes that were written out from other kakampis, and we'll just go ahead and read them, and then you can offer a response on it.
Sure.
Yung first generations are the ones who usually cling on classic Filipino traits, mannerisms, cultures, etc. Most second generation FilAms, they maintain Filipino family values and interests in food, but have no desire, and it was to go to the Philippines or to live in the Philippines. What do you have to say about this from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there is something there to that about, we were talking about this. There's like some semantics involved with like what is first generation, second generation. I was kind of explaining that I consider myself more like first generation FilAm because my parents immigrated from the Philippines to here, so they were the previous generation. I don't know how you would call that, but I understand what we were talking about here, and I could see that. I feel like I know a lot of people that I grew up with. I grew up in a very predominantly like Filipino area. That's why I think
you were in the West Coast.
I was in the West Coast. I'm here in California, but I grew up in a city like that was a pocket where there were a lot of Filipinos actually, and we were actually like the majority in the schools that I attended growing up, but not many of them. I'm not sure how many of them like ended up going to the Philippines, really. There are some that do, but I do see that where there is a tendency of like holding on to like the cultural values, like the things that are very Filipino that I think translate over from the Philippines to here are just how tight those familial bonds are. We have like the parties that,
Salo-salo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what we do. Like, and we that tradition has been kept by the generation that immigrated here, and so we just kind of associate that as Filipino because when we see if we have friends outside of the Filipino culture, our white friends, black friends, other kinds of friends, you don't really see that within their spaces. So
not a whole ton.
yeah, I think, and then I don't know, there's also like changes too that are happening as well, where like I think Filipino culture is starting to become a little bit more mainstream to a certain extent. It's not to like the level of like other Asian cultures here in the United States, like Japanese culture or Chinese culture, or even like Thai culture, Vietnamese culture in terms of cuisine. But yeah, I think that there is an embrace of those things like food and all of that. But at the same time, like going to the Philippines, I think it's just there's a lot of, and that might just be the American side of things where people, there are a lot of Americans, not just like Filipino Americans, but Americans in general who do not have passports and do not leave this country and explore beyond these borders. And the Philippines is a long distance, even though if you're living here in California or the West Coast like I am, that's a long plane ride. for many people, especially if they've never gone on such kind of journey before. So that might also be part of the hesitance there to go to the Philippines, but they should, because I've been back now. I've been back. I was in the Philippines 2019, 2018, back-to-back years after not being in the Philippines for almost 15 years. I had gone the previous times before that. I had gone to the Philippines as a teenager in like the early 2000s. And then before that, I was a child the last time I had gone in like the 90s. So
you enjoyed coming here.
Yeah, I did. I mean, and it's also just like, I think it's just an appreciation now that I'm older, like of understanding that part of who I am, like that culture is a part of me, and that I have to make more of a concerted effort to learn more about it, and to see what the people, to try my best to see what the people go through there. Like, I have relatives, in the Philippines, and I know we want to touch on that a little bit later, but
yeah, we will. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, very nice. Let's see here. Another stereotype is most FilAms that this kakampi knows don't speak their mother tongue because of the need to blend in. Well, that presupposes things. I think that it's always about blending in. Would you say that there's a lot of truth to that?
I would say that there's truth to that, but it's truth from like the parental level. So hello, Jolo. I see your message in the chat. You asked me if I know how to speak Tagalog. I cannot speak Tagalog. Like, I can piece together things, and I feel like if I lived in the Philippines for an extended period of time and I'm like speaking it constantly, like I would pick it up, because I understand it actually fluently. I learned how to comprehend Tagalog just by being a nosy child and listening to my parents speak Tagalog to each other at the dinner table. And of course, it's a mix of Tagalog and English, Taglish, so you can kind of piece those things together. But I've talked about this with my parents, that there was like a conscious decision to not teach me Tagalog, and to not have me learn it, because I think there was a little bit of a fear on their end that I might have trouble keeping up in school.
Yeah, I've heard that one a lot. I also know that I've heard from a lot of people too that they're afraid that their English is going to struggle because of that, which I find so interesting, because the Philippines itself is one of the it is the best Asian country that speaks English. So you see people who are, ABCs, American-born Chinese, their English is flawless, but they also speak Chinese super well, which are completely different, way more different languages than, English to Tagalog,
I have a theory.
Oh, you have a theory?
Because a lot of Filipinos think that Tagalog or any other Filipino language is inferior to English. So they don't think that it's okay to teach their kids two languages at the same time, because the Tagalog might affect the English learning of the child, or Tagalog is not really that necessary compared to English.
Yeah, I've actually heard that one too, and I've even observed that one too. There are some titas that they'll go away from the country and immigrate to like the US or Canada or something, and then they'll come back and it'll be like, they'll come back and they'll be speaking Tagalog, they'll be speaking only English as if they're like a socialite or something, and like sobrang social. And I've spoken in Pangasinan. I lived in Pangasinan, and that was something that I know I heard from a lot of people that they were very upset that they wouldn't speak either Ilocano or Tagalog, which is very predominant in Alaminos. Yeah, so very interesting. Do you wish to learn Tagalog? Do you wish you learned Tagalog?
Yeah, I wish I did. I wish I did when I was a kid, because it's like it's half there. It's like I can understand it. I always tell people even when I'm visiting the Philippines, they'll ask me, "Do you understand Tagalog?" I said, "Yeah, just speak it. I can only respond to you in because some of my relatives there, they're like more comfortable speaking Tagalog than English." And so I said, "Yeah, just speak it."
I bet if you were here for a long time, a significant amount of time, you could probably pick it up pretty
it's
well
just sad.
too. I
It's
know
sad
that
to
there's
me.
also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's sad to me that there is that mentality amongst my parents' generation when they came here, because we look at, for example, like Latino Americans, Mexican Americans, they speak fluent Spanish. Like I
Yeah,
had classmates
exactly.
who were Mexican, and they speak fluent Spanish and they speak fluent English, and it wasn't a problem for them. And it's like,
Yeah.
there's such an advantage there to being bilingual, and
Right.
I feel like we missed out on that growing
Yeah,
up.
that's what I'm saying, is it's really kind of sad to me that that would be a thing, because there are so many Latino Americans and American born Chinese who they have no problem. Though I will say this, in Andrew Huang's memoir, Fresh Off the Boat, he did describe having Filipino friends as a kid and being jealous of the Filipino Americans of FilAms, because they got to kind of create more of their own culture, or to be cultural chameleons, whereas he, as an American born Chinese, was kind of forced to be Chinese, and it like kind of created this difficulty of balance for him. I've also heard, what was I going to say? In terms of not speaking their mother tongue, I've also heard of, I have friends, Philam friends, who they were made fun of by relatives because they did speak some Tagalog, but it was with an American accent. It was like my kind of an accent.
Yeah.
And it discouraged them from continuing to speak Tagalog. So I'm curious, dito sa comment section, kung may kapamilya kayo na nasa ibang bansa, magiging mindful sana tayo na huwag pagtawanan yung pagbikas masyado, kasi siguro yung isa din sa mga dahilan kung bakit kung minsan hindi natutunan ng Tagalog is because they're afraid of being shamed by family, by native Filipino family members.
Yeah, we go through that a lot. I don't know if that's like just inherently like Filipino thing, or maybe it's just like human being thing. But I mean, there are many things that like my older relatives would like tease me about. Like, I mean, for example, like I was always called growing up, "Oh, you're so suplado," like I'm stuck up.
Yeah.
Because I'm an only child. I didn't have siblings growing up. I had as I mentioned to you before the call, like I have a half sibling from my dad's first marriage, but we didn't grow up together. But so I always kind of got that from like my aunties and uncles, like saying that to me, and that stuck with me. And it like really, I don't even think they realize how much that influenced and impacted the kind of person that I became today. Because I tried so hard to like make sure that I don't come across that way. But it was just because I was shy. I was like, I was a shy, introverted kid growing up, and they kind of, made it out to be. They may have been teasing me, but I think they also were just interpreting that, oh, he thinks he's like better than us or something.
Well, which actually brings us to our next stereotype, is elitista, being elitist or being mayabang.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, you know what, when we were talking about this a little bit as we were prepping for this before we went live, but you know, looking back at my youth when I was in my teen, especially like teen years, I think there was elitism amongst us that now when we look back are like, oh yeah, we were not being, you know, nice, or we didn't think that we were. We just thought that this is just the way it is. Like, you know, they're fobs. They're fresh off the boat. You know, they're like, we're not saying it out loud explicitly that we think that you're beneath us, but the way that we are talking about you behind your backs, it suggests that that's how we feel. And I look back at that and I honestly say, man, I was an idiot. It's like stupid. You know, that's like, we're all human beings here. And if anything, like these are you know, we're family, if anything, you know, like we should all be joined together. But there is, like it was in that video, right? Is that there's like this, there is kind of like this schism or break between FilAms and like actual native Filipinos. Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think it's an interesting thing too. I think there is this American thing that you grow up with that Americans know best. So which is just so silly. I mean, I didn't really think of myself being American until I came to the Philippines. And interestingly, I thought I was less of a person, like particularly being a minority when I lived here. Like I was like, oh man, I wish I was this. Of course, I had certain thoughts and ideas maybe that I was like, this is right, this is how it's done or whatever. But, you know, I think that those things kind of clean themselves up. But I wonder if that's kind of what seeps in, is just this thing about being American where you don't even realize it at the time, you know. Okay, so another stereotype that we'll discuss is they force Filipinos who grew up in the Philippines to call themselves Philippines or Filipinx. I don't know how to pronounce it, and label them backwards if they don't want to do that. So this is a pretty new thing, and it's about the non-binary sort of gender neutral, diba? Instead of Filipina and Filipino, there's a movement in the U.S. that no, you must say Philippines to keep it more gender neutral and non-binary friendly. Mm-hmm. I guess there's a couple of layers to that. Some of that is that it's forced upon people who grow up in a different context. And then the other part of it is the specific Philippines itself. What are some of your thoughts and ideas about this one? Yeah, I think, you know, this is something that I'm still trying to formulate like my ideas and thoughts on, because these are all like relatively new concepts. And I consider myself first and foremost somebody that's respectful of however you want to interpret yourself. If you want to interpret yourself as, you know, in terms of whatever pronoun you want to, that's fine by me. And I will respect that. And I will call you by that if that's what you would like, you know?
Right.
But at the same time, this idea of like forcing it upon someone and then through shame or anything like that, that's not something that I think is an effective technique. And I don't know, again, like this is something that I've not come across any FilAms who do that. But again, it probably also depends on where the political meanings are. You know, what part
definitely
they lie in, and my guess would be it's like if you're further to the left, then you're going to be a little bit more forceful about pushing that idea out and trying to shame people about it. Whereas if you're further to the right, you're probably, you know, yelling equally as loud against it. Whereas I find myself somewhere right in the middle where I'm like, just trying to understand what this is. Like, I want to know, I want to listen to you. I want to understand what this concept is, because this is not something that this is like brand new stuff to me.
Yeah, we were kind of talking about this. This is something that I think both you and I can relate on as Americans, is you get labeled instantly as a fence sitter or a middle grounder, as if they're like insults in America, But then if you try to see more of what that side is saying and try to explain that or express that, you're also instantly viewed as being way too, sometimes people will use the term snowflake or too liberal or too, whatever, you're being ridiculous. And so it's kind of an interesting thing that I think you and I were talking about being fence sitters, that it's like, you're kind of forced to choose one or the other, which is difficult.
Yeah, it's like that. There was you did a live stream. What was it, a week and a half ago, with the Filipino gentleman who he was
Raul Contreras.
No,
I
the
believe.
other one. He was.
Johnny Antilion.
Yeah, and they had that debate about American ideals, and I think it was the British guy who pointed this out. But it's just this idea here in America that everything kind of, ironically, like, it's a you have to have binary thinking, right?
Yeah.
It's either this or that. You're on this side or that side. You're Democrat, you're Republican, you're black.
Whereas
white,
in Britain, he was saying there's more shades of gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something for me where it's like, I look, I also have a different perspective because I have like traveled quite a lot. Like before COVID, I was in Asia for most of 2019, in Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia for a little bit. The year before that, I was in Colombia for 5 months living there. I've been to South Africa. I've been to a lot of Europe. And so I see life from like many different perspectives, and that there are very different ways to like live a good life. It doesn't have to necessarily be one certain way. And we do get in trouble with that here, I think, in America, where there's this idea of like, no, you got to choose a side, like pick your team.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
It's caused a lot of issues, I think, that you all have probably seen from afar in terms of our media landscape and our society right now here in the States.
Yeah, I think Kakamping Haraya explains it well. I respect those FilAms who label themselves Philippines, but I'm not happy they shame those who do not. I've seen a lot of Philippines groups on social media forcing all Filipinos to use Philippines. Yeah, and then then we've got, this is kind of a little jesting, parang tunog Pokemon yung Philippines, like it sounds like it's a Pokemon. I mean, you got to consider, right? Like you got to consider,
it does kind of sound like a Pokemon.
I choose you, Philippines. Philippines, throw adobo.
What does it evolve? What does it evolve to? Is that like the first? Is that the first iteration of the, or does it turn into something else?
Yeah, that's a good point. Philippinser.
Oh my god.
Philippinser. And it'll be what would Philippines do? What would their main thing be?
Jared, I could just imagine someone just like finding this live
video and then being like,
taking this segment and then just pulling it out and then
exactly
small segment, and then turning it into a video and say, finished.
Cancel these guys. Yeah, you and I are on the same wavelength. I was debating whether to even feature that comment. Like, sana naiintindihan nyo din, mga kikampi. Like, this is the struggle we fence-sitting Americans go through. Like, are we going to get canceled over something?
I know, man.
Yeah. But, okay, part 2, questions. So, these came from mga kakampis, as well as Gail came up with some of these as well. Some kakampis of interracial families describe being part of mixed cultures. Did you feel that you got a dose of many different cultures growing up, and did those ever conflict with one another?
So I would say no, because again, my experience growing up here in the US is just, I feel like it's very unique in that I experienced being a minority, at least in terms of representation. Like when it came to turning on the television and seeing and watching TV, I didn't see many people who look like me on TV. Anytime
Dante Basco.
Other than Dante Bosco, that's it. You know, like, and when we see someone like us on TV, we know, and we're like, oh, that person's Filipino. That's nice.
Yeah.
But that's where I felt like a minority. When it came to like my actual day-to-day life and where I grew up, again, where I went to these schools, elementary all the way up until high school, were like, I would say 70% or like 80% of my schoolmates were Filipino Americans like me, like first generation born here in the US. And we were like the dominant majority. There were more of us than the white people. There were more of us than the black people, more of us than the Latino people.
I wonder about what it would be like for a FilAm who's living in somewhere like Florida or somewhere where there isn't as much diversity. I know another good FilAm friend of mine said there was a big difference between living in Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland area, where there's a pretty big concentration of Filipinos. Versus going to Florida, and he said that it was definitely different. He definitely experienced racial slurs or just people looking at him weird or funny. And
exactly. I have a friend, one of my good friends, like he got to experience both cultures because he.
Oh, John. One moment. Saglit lang mga kikampi. Saglit lang mga kikampi. Hey, John. Hey, you cut out for a good little bit.
Yep.
Let's you were saying he experienced both sides of it.
Yeah, no, he just experienced both like West Coast and East Coast culture where he was
gotcha.
He lived in Falls Church, Virginia, and then also here in the Bay
that's
Area,
close to where I lived.
Yeah, exactly. So he knows what it was like to kind of, I guess, experience both of those environments. And yeah, it's different. Like you referenced like Eddie Wong's memoir. I read it fresh off the boat, and I was like so fascinated by it because I'm like, okay, he's Asian American like me, but like he had a totally different Asian American experience. Because he was living in places where he actually had to experience being a minority. Whereas, like,
he was living in Florida. Yeah.
I grew up in a place where I did not experience that. I was in a bubble where I felt comfortable around like a lot of other Filipino people.
Right on. All right. So this question is, how do you identify yourself? Are you more Filipino or more American?
Man, that one, when we were like browsing through that was an interesting question to me because I always consider, like, I always refer to myself Filipino American, Filipino-American. I don't often like just refer to myself solely as one or the other. I think that I have.
You feel like you're a combination.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, that leads us to our next question, actually. What are the Filipino values and traditions that you love? And what are the ones you don't like?
Like, again, the values, just like family, there's a real like emphasis on family in Filipino culture, being together and of each other. I really appreciate that. honestly, when I was growing up as a teenager, you go through those awkward years, and especially as I mentioned to you, where I had these, I had like relatives who may have teased me for being quote unquote suplado, right? That kind of like made me. It kind of made me distance myself at times from my family, certain segments of my family. But then now, as I've gotten older, like I just appreciate that so much. Able to, because our family's grown so huge now, right? Because my mom, for example, pretty much like all of her side immigrated and lives here in this area that I grew up in, and like I have cousins who are also like first generation born now. They have kids, and so like the family is just huge. We didn't have Christmas last year or Thanksgiving because of COVID, but like every time we have like a family party or Christmas get together, like there's just so many people. It's like 100 people or something in one person's house. It's crazy, but we're all like connected together because of our family. And sometimes I do wonder about how my generation, what we're gonna do to make sure we retain that after our parents, uncles and aunties all pass on to the older generation. So something for us to.
Oops, John.
Oh,
sorry, it cut out briefly. Yeah. So it's you were saying that you're thinking about how to carry that on. So
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Very, very cool. Yeah. How do you do mano? Do you do mano po?
Yeah, so I've done it when I was younger, for like
cool.
Like bless, and when I go to the Philippines though, like all my like nieces and nephews, they'll do it to me, and personally for me, I feel kind of awkward about it because I don't feel like I don't feel like an elder or something like that, but I am now. I mean, I'm in my 30s and whatnot, but I have cousins who have kids. The last time I visited, they all were just doing bless. All right. Hey, good to see you too.
Yeah. Nice. What's something that you don't like?
Man, I think like sometimes with Filipino culture, we can be a bit I don't know how to say it, but just like there's a lot of like backhandedness, I think, like, or just talking behind people's back. I don't want to use like curse words here, but like talking, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Behind each other's backs.
They say plastic. Here they say kaplastikan. Yeah.
Yeah. I just feel like there's always so much like gossip. It's like, why do you do this? That's one thing that annoys me about the culture. But I sense that is versus like other Asian cultures. Like I don't really see that. I think Filipinos are probably the most guilty in that regard.
That's a way to bond for Filipinos. Gossiping.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like, I think it's one thing too, if you're sharing experiences with somebody that you're like super, super, super close to, like, it's not going to escape their lips. You have that confidence and there's no judgment attached to it. It's just sharing different, like, hey, so-and-so is blah, blah, blah. But you just know that it's going to get around to like a very, chismosa tita, or like someone that's going to like shame and judge the person for it. Like I think it's the shame aspect and the like being judgmental aspect of it. Like the actual sharing of it isn't so bad. I think it's more of the judgmental aspect of it. Yeah. Like the backbiting, like you said, the talking, the crap talking on others, John? Oh, I think we lost John again.
John, come back.
John. So, hinihintay lang natin si John. So ngayon, mga kakampi, I think
Hey,
nawala siya. We're going to go ahead. Oh, you're back.
I'm here. You know what?
Okay,
One
okay.
second. I want to try and I'm having some issues here with my internet. I think it's because I realize I'm on Wi-Fi. Let me like turn this off and see what happens.
Okay. So, saglit lang. Tingnan natin yung mga ibang comments dito.
Oh my God. There you go. I'm
Okay,
back.
you got it?
Yes.
Cool.
Now
cool.
I'm on
wanna-
Ethernet.
Okay, sweet. I would like to just really quick, take this. The Kakumping nurse Candy says, I see this between Filipino nurses too. Clicks form talaga. And so there's clicks. Nurse Candy's accent was made fun of. Isa siyang nakatira siya sa US, I believe. I'm very sorry to hear that, Kakampi. I like this. Naalala ko yung kwento, so I'll translate this for you. I remember the story of Joe. He said he has a harder time with reading. Yeah, I remember the story of Joe Coy when his mom was being mocked by a salesman, and he retaliated. The mom retaliated by saying she speaks 2 languages, so it implicated that she's like 10 times smarter than the salesman.
Oh yeah. Dude, he's funny. He's again, like we have like the same heroes of anybody, whether it's, I feel like, I don't know, I'm curious if anybody in the chat feels this way, but when you see like a FilAm make it, like Joe Coy, who's half, right? He's mestizo.
Mm-hmm.
His mom is Filipino. His dad was a white guy. There's still a sense of pride there. And then like vice versa for us, like when we see someone like Manny Pacquiao, who is from the Philippines, doing things, we get excited too because he represents us. But again, you have like these weird, it's just bizarre, and I think it's changing now as like the generations grow older. But there is just like these divides where like, oh, it's like FilAm versus Filipino, or like FilAm is like higher than the Filipino. I mean, for example, like one thing that comes to mind is like I always think about like a lot of actors and actresses who came from like the US or like Canada, and like they just it's almost kind of like assume, oh, they just came from America and they're just gonna instantly have success just because they're FilAm or like Filipino Canadian. And it's like bizarre to me that's the case. Now when I think about it, back then I was just like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. This is interesting right here. I was not brought up to do manopo gesture kasi yung papa ko, he was more westernized, I guess. He wanted to teach a little more Western sort of values. Very interesting. Oh yeah, by the way, I have watched Rex Navarrete. He's got some good ones. There's also
he's an OG.
There's some other comedians too, Filipino comedians that
Joey Gila, I believe.
Yeah, there's some that are very local though. Like I hosted a show and this guy was making some jokes I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
But all right, yeah, let's go ahead and move on. What were the challenges you faced growing up as a FilAm? Were there bullies? Did you have to explain your ethnicity a lot? And I guess for you, this wasn't as much an issue. Yeah, you were kind of growing up around FilAms.
I was never like bullied, obviously, but there are certain things that I look back on now, like not like there was an instance where I remember, and these guys were just observing them. They were also classmates of mine.
Mm-hmm.
But they were another friend group in high school and elementary school. And I think they were saying this at the time, like they were saying it's like a gesture of friendship. But then looking back at it now, it's kind of like, I don't know if you want to be calling them that, but they would call like the one like Filipino guy in their group Gook.
Oh, That doesn't sound nice.
It doesn't sound nice at all. Like in hindsight.
I don't even know what that word means, but it just doesn't sound nice.
Yeah, that's like it's like it is a derogatory term for usually. I think it's usually in reference to like Chinese people, but I guess it's also just in reference to all Asian people in general. But I look back at that now. And they were the friends who were. They were the ones who were saying it were the ones who were not. They were not Filipino. They were white.
Yeah.
They were Hispanic. And looking back, I'm like, I don't think you probably like want to take that back. But
yeah,
this with your youth, right? Like I think that we all say stupid things and do stupid things when we're younger. Even now, I would probably look back like 20 years from now and just say, oh gosh, why did I think
why did we laugh at Philippines being Pokemon?
Exactly.
Yeah. All righty. Let's take a look at this next one. Do you have family you said actually you already do have family in the Philippines. Do you relate pretty well with them? Are there cultural barriers that you find with them?
I think there are cultural barriers, but like I appreciate them more now because I get, I've gotten to see some of them, especially like mostly lately it's been like the ones on my mom's side. Cause we actually have like, I've thought about this quite a bit, just in terms of like my mom's side of the family, their origin story of how they came here. This is a bit unfair because I have the fact that I still have some relatives who are there. They should be here with us. And unfortunately, there were some issues where that didn't end up being the case. My grandfather actually served in the Korean War. And that's a whole other story that I would love to like explore at some point personally for myself. But he actually came here to the US, I think in like in the 60s or so. He wasn't around physically like with my mom and my uncles and aunts like growing up there in the Philippines, but he was here trying to like get his citizenship, like to prove that he served in that war that was fought by the Americans. And apparently, and this is where I want to get fact checks on it, but like apparently they were trying, what I understand about it is that they were denying his and like other Filipino citizens, Filipino soldiers citizenship because there's like, no, you were like part of guerrilla forces or something. We didn't like contract you for our American, our American exploits in Korea. So it was like a battle, I think. And again, that's something like gotta fact check that and like but that's how I've understood the story from like my mom's perspective of what I've heard and even from talking to some of my other aunts and uncles. But it was unfortunate. So once he finally got that, then he started petitioning, bringing all the other relatives in. But one of my uncles, unfortunately, there was just an issue with him he got married, but my grandfather and grandmother petitioned for him as a single person. And so unfortunately, they were just kind of worried that he couldn't, like, they didn't want to take that chance of him like coming in and then they find out, oh, you're married, like we're gonna boot you out this country and never allow you here. So he had to redo his petition, but unfortunately he passed away before that could have happened. And it
ruined the chances for others.
It ruined the chances basically for his kids, my cousins. And I know that like some of, they were looking forward to coming here. And I think about that. I thought about that a lot, especially like having seen them in the when I have visited and just thinking about like the opportunities that they just missed out on, if they could have came here, like how different their lives would have been. Because I think it's different now, like trying to come in and immigrate into the US now, it's much more difficult because the wealth gap is so wide And so to start from like the absolute bottom, like immigrating from
it's
another
hard.
country, it's very hard to like emerge into like even middle class or like a wealthier class here in the United States. Whereas like at that time, like in the early 80s, 1970s, there was more opportunity, I think, for like immigrants to come in and like raise themselves up, elevate their social class and whatnot. And so I think about that. And it just makes me, puts things in perspective for me. It's like, you can't squander your opportunity, man, because you lucked out on the lottery.
Yeah.
Like it's not because the things that I've been able to do in my life it's not just like, yeah, I've worked hard. I feel like I'm pretty talented at the certain things that I do, but there's a lot of luck involved. Like I could have had the same talent, worked just as hard, but then, not been born here. Could have been born in the Philippines, and my life would have been totally different.
Yeah, opportunities. I love that video. I gotta do a reaction video to that sometime. Like there's an older gentleman, isang tito sa kalye, sinabi niya, hindi namin kailangan ng tulong niyo, ang kailangan namin ay opportunity. We don't need your help. We need opportunities. And I strongly agree with that. May tanong dito kay Kakamping Luan, how about the stream of racial hate, especially the Asian hate that is presently happening? And the one FilAm was slashed in the face inside the subway train. Did you hear about that, John?
This is the first time I've heard about it. I admit that I'm quite I try not to read too much news, because I think news can kind of drive you crazy,
insane
over time.
Yeah.
I there are a couple newsletters that I subscribe to, but I try to and again, like, I know that there are certain people out there who might say, well, then you're just being ignorant, you're not being aware of the issues going on. And
right,
it's like, you got to have like some equanimity in your life. Like I have things that I want to be aware of these things, but like after a while, like if it just keeps happening and happening and happening, like, I also have a background in news. I understand how the news cycle works, and like,
it's a lot of it is about the sensationalism and what can get clicks, what can get views, which is the same thing with YouTube and other social media. They use those same principles that came from the news, right? Yeah. So I wonder though, how much is it misrepresenting the US as well? Because I always struggle with this. I always struggle with this one, because it's like, I don't want to downplay the bad things that are happening at all. But if you are living in that place, it's probably like it is in the Philippines. People might have ideas about the Philippines being a dangerous place. Yeah. But if you're living in there, like, what is the practical day-to-day things that are happening? Is it actually dangerous? I personally have not really experienced that many dangerous situations. I have experienced a couple, but that was probably my own like lack of care, lack of carefulness. But like, that's true of anything and anywhere. So I wonder how much of it, anyway, I've seen Asian Boss. They're a media company that has their YouTube channel. And they interview people or Asians around the world. And one of the street interviews they did was about Asian Americans. And most of the people they got on there, just as a perspective, said, oh yeah, I haven't personally experienced it. But yes, I know of it happening, and it's unfortunate that it does. And, there are smaller things, of course, that I think are definitely more widespread, like your friends calling your other group calling your Filipino friend or peer, a racial slur. That's sad, and it's unfortunate, and that those things need to continue to disappear and continue to be addressed. But at a certain point, I feel like there's a lot of bad things that happen in general, and those are the things that get more of the news attention than the things that are like more normal or good.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's like, for example, with and again, I'm not trying to minimize the issue. I think there is a problem, but at the same time, like, it's how, like, it's complicated because
is it being represented? Is the commonality of it being represented accurately by the news media? And I think as far as for instance, not to go too political or to go down a rabbit hole or anything, but as far as like police brutality, particularly on Black people, I would say that that's pretty not necessarily across the board. All police are like that towards Black people, but I would say that it is a very large issue that does happen quite frequently, that ought to get the level of attention that it does. And I think the same thing with Middle Eastern people, remember after 9/11, just how severe like people were towards people from Afghanistan or just wherever they were from in the Middle East, and people were so prejudiced towards them. Like, those are real problems for sure. And Asian hate is a problem right now, as we've seen it broadcast and stuff. But to say that it's happening every second, and if you yourself travel to the US right now, somebody is going to like be slashing your face or doing whatever, it's not. I personally, simply based on talking with my FilAm friends and my Asian American friends and seeing videos where Asian Americans are like, well, luckily that hasn't happened to me. Yeah. It might be getting the kind of coverage that would lead other countries like the Philippines to believing that it's a bigger issue, a more widespread issue than it actually is.
Yeah. I think it happens, but like to the degree, like you said, it's not like, I mean, I just went out for the first time in like a year and a half. Like, I was, before I hopped on this live stream with you, I actually hung out with a friend of mine. Like, we actually went out to a bar. The CDC actually just changed the guidelines and allowed people who are vaccinated. I'm fortunate to be fully vaccinated to now, move around without masks. And so I went out, and it's not like I stepped outside and walked into this bar and like somebody was like charging at me, like ready to beat me up because I'm Asian,
Yeah, exactly.
That's not how it is. It's very similar. Like, even when, like I mentioned, I lived in Colombia for 5 months in 2018. There's an assumption there that's like, oh, that's Pablo Escobar, cocaine territory, drug cartels. That's dangerous, Or like going to, I've been Europe. I've been to Eastern Europe, been to like former Yugoslavia, going to like Bosnia, and there was a war there in the 90s, and you tell people you're going to Bosnia, and it's like, isn't there a war there? It's dangerous.
Yeah, right.
It's like when you go there, like, my belief is that, generally speaking, and just from like actual experience, like, our lives are like pretty good, like pretty decent. And again, I probably also am talking from a place where like I recognize that I probably have more advantages than other people, just based on like my upbringing and my environment. I know it's not the same for everyone. I want to acknowledge that, but generally speaking, like, I think that most of us, what we experience is it's just normal. It's normal life, like, with the exception of what's happened in the last year with COVID.
Right. And to answer your question, Kakampi, it's Jello. I think that this wave, and it's always existed. There's always been racism issues, which I just want to really quick, as an American, I would say that, other countries, a lot of other countries, I don't think have the same level of diversity that the U.S. itself has. So I just always find it kind of interesting how people would say the U.S. is the only place that has racism issues, but the U.S. is one of the first and only places in the world to be as ethnically diverse as it is. So it's an experiment, right? The U.S. is called the Great Experiment. But with all of that, how did this even start? I believe this particular wave was because of COVID, that there's a lot of people who were blaming Chinese, and then by default, anyone else who looks like they could be related to Chinese or whatever. And it's really disturbing. It's really upsetting. It's stupid. It's really, really just stupidity, honestly. And sometimes, unfortunately, very dangerous stupidity. So yeah, it's really, really, really sad. And it's a complex thing too. You know, how can we possibly answer all of the ins and outs of that when it could be a different story for each person? You know.
Yeah.
Let's move on though. Similar sort of ethnic-based question. Did you face any ethnicity-based challenges in dating ever?
So this was an interesting a question that really like piqued my interest because
and
go ahead.
Sorry, and something connected, we can probably answer this all in one, is do you think the emasculation of Filipino/Asian men is still a thing in the US? So yeah, let's kind of tackle those two.
Yeah, so in terms of challenges, when I look back on it, like the biggest challenge was just right here, what you thought about yourself, what I thought about myself. And you know, I think, and to tie into that second question, like I think my generation, and I see this differently now for probably like the younger generations of Asian Americans, is that we have like an inferiority complex, even as men, because like we just have this because we never see ourselves like portrayed in like, you know, quote unquote, like masculine ways. And even like we have there's this reputation that even our women, they don't even want us. They want a white person instead, you know, like, and so for me, it was very interesting because like growing up, like I wasn't somebody who dated around. I was still just like, you know, afraid of getting rejected and like even asking the girl. I think like a lot of young kids are like that in high school, even asking like the girls I had crushes on if they would want to go out with me or anything like that. But you know, as I got older and I started to get better at operating within like the dating sphere, ironically, like I don't know if it was just like a intentional thing, but more of like a subconscious thing where like most of the women that I've dated in my life actually have been white. And it was almost, I think when I think of it at like a subconscious level, it's like I'm trying to prove to myself that, oh, look, you say I can't get white women because I'm Asian. Watch. And I
watch.
And I've, again, like a lot of women that I have like dated in my life, I'm a single guy now. Like they have been predominantly white, but that also impacted me to where I also just kind of was like removing myself from consideration with like Filipino women or other Asian women. And it's crazy because, again, as I mentioned, like being in Asia for most of 2019 and in like, you know, a handful of countries in Southeast Asia, it's like it kind of like being able to engage with like other Asian women now at this age, like in your 30s or, you know, late 20s, mid to late 20s and stuff like that. It's like, oh, wait, I'm like intensely attracted to you. Like, and we have this similar kind of culture of being from like this Asian region, but I'm like vibing with you on like the same wavelength. And I never really thought that was possible before because I had this assumption that you're just going to favor like the white person over me, you know? So.
Which, you know, isn't that that leads into a kind of other interesting thing is I personally have felt that some guys at times would maybe hate on me maybe because of that.
Yeah, that's true. No,
Whereas
honest, I'll confirm that. Like we were hating on you.
Yeah,
we were hating in the background, just like, why these white dudes just taking all of our
right. Well, but and what's so funny about that too is, for me, like, I don't know, maybe there are some like white guys that are just kind of like, you know, like,
well, it's like, you know, the concept of like yellow fever.
Right. Yeah. And that's yeah. And so for me, it was kind of like this thing where anytime I would hear, like, if I heard an Asian woman downing an Asian guy, I'd kind of be like, that's not cool, man. Like, don't go there. And so it's kind of weird in a sense, because it's like somebody would automatically look at me and be like, oh, blah, 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 and make assumptions about, you know, maybe I would be the one to be like, oh yeah, those Asian guys, like, you know what I mean? But really, I'm like, for me, I was always like, you know, for instance, if an Asian guy gets with like a white girl, I'm like, good stuff. Like, I'm like, awesome. Or
and that's where I'm saying, like, it's different. I'm seeing that shift in the younger generation. I think part of that is because the young Asian Americans now, like, for example, like, if I could put, like, I'm at an age where I could have like kids in high school. Like, if I had kids, if I like was with somebody and had kids at like 20 or something, they would be high school age now. And they would be like, you know, a little bit removed from the Filipino culture and probably more American, closely connected to like their relationship with being American rather than Filipino, because like I'm already like removed from being quote unquote true Filipino because I was born here. But you see it now where like Asian culture from actual Asia is now starting to influence the West, right? Like we see Korean K-pop music here in the US. BTS is like, I don't know if I'm not super into all the boy band stuff, but they are still like the biggest boy band in the world, right? And they're Korean. And you see like that's influencing like this younger generation of thinking like, oh, wow, these like Korean guys, you know, and they have more, I would say, like looking at them, they have more feminine traits to them, but they're considered like handsome, right? And they're attracting like this younger generation of women who aren't Asian. And then even just seeing like for a couple years ago, right, we had Crazy Rich Asians, and there were like a lot of good looking Asian men in that movie. I'm not afraid to admit that.
Oh no, me neither. I definitely was like, dang, these guys are good looking.
These dudes were ripped. They look good. But at the same time, I was happy for that, because I'm like, if they're showing like these Asian dudes looking handsome, then that's going to change the perception, and it'll be good for me.
Hell yeah, definitely.
It'll change some women who were like, I didn't consider Asian guys, but wait a minute, these Asian guys on this movie, they look, maybe I should swipe right on this Asian dude on the date.
I'm all for it, man. Yeah. You know, and to go along, you know, I do think it's interesting that there are so many stigmas in terms of dating interracially by itself. You know, there's terms like yellow fever, there's terms like you know, there's terms like oh, you know, there's the person who got a lot of flack because, oh, I don't date Asian men, you know, like Asian women saying things like that. You know, you've got people saying I mean, it's just all over the board, right? And it's just kind of like, you know, if somebody dates somebody like who's of a particular ethnicity or whatever, it's like, it's hoped that it would just kind of be like, you know what, if you two are happy, you two are happy, you know, like if you're doing what you want, then great. As long as you're not like maybe reducing a person's identity to only whatever their ethnicity is, you know what I mean? As long as there's an embrace of their individual qualities instead of, you know, just simply like, oh, I'm going to date this person specifically because they are this, and then indiscriminately go about that. I believe it all boils down to compatibility. I like that. I like that, Kumpy.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that it's, a lot of these things are just like stories that we tell ourselves in our heads. And like when you can choose to like, you can choose to accept those stories as your reality, or you can decide to write your own narrative and then and live a completely different life. Like I just kind of believe that.
Yeah, a big part of that is just hearing other people's perspectives and stories, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what I love
know?
about the internet, is because like,
Yeah,
I mean, it's a double-edged sword, but it exposes you to like these different ideas where it's like, oh, that's possible. Like I never thought of that. Like, I mean, you know, we had talked before, Jared, you know, you had mentioned to me that you knew the guys from they're no longer active on YouTube, but Simple Pickup. They were like one of the really big YouTube channels in the early, like a decade ago, which is crazy to say because they're like the same age as us. But like they were these three guys, Kong, Jesse, and Jason, and they were like aspirational figures, I think, for me and like other like Asian men, because it's like, whoa, there's an Indian dude, there's a Vietnamese dude, and then there's like a Hapa, like Japanese half white guy, and they're going out and like talking to all these girls and getting their phone numbers, like, you know, it's very
just proof. Yeah, it's a good trying to flips the narrative a bit.
Exactly, you know, and it kind of makes you think like, wow, that's really, I've never seen that before. You could do that. Like, first of all, you could just go up and like talk to somebody, like talk to a woman and do that in a respectful manner too, like I would say. And of course, like, you know, there can be some issues with just going up and cold approaching someone and being super vulgar about it, right?
Right.
But it's just it kind of like broke this paradigm of like, you're not allowed to do that, or you're not allowed to like try to like make that happen. And to see someone who looked like you doing that, it kind of can give you some confidence to go out and try it yourself.
Definitely. Let's take a look at this one from Kakampialina DK. To Sir John, did you feel the pressure to help fellow Filipinos who just got to the States?
Man, I'm probably gonna end up sounding like a terrible person for saying this, but I will say no. Like I never felt that way. Again, it just wasn't. I just never felt like it was my issue or problem. But I will say I do have a friend who he has cousins and family that did immigrate from the Philippines to the US within like the last 15 years, actually. And I know that if there is any kind of pressure, it's more like parental pressure, at least from my vantage point of observing his experience, where his parents, like, they were like, go take your cousins and do this, or go hang out with them and do that, like help, you know, you're supposed to help them. So it's never, if there's any kind of pressure, and I imagine that it might be the same for maybe some other FilAms, I'm not sure, but that's just based on that one particular case study of my friend. Like it's not like an internal personal pressure, it's a pressure from like the family, like your parents, to like, you have to do this, you know.
Right on. Yeah. So we have another question here. How do you feel about Filipino culture getting featured in U.S. media? Bon Appetit, for example, has recently featured a lot of Filipino food and chefs. Do you feel like it's tokenistic?
I don't, because I feel like we just never have been represented before. So it's nice that we're getting that recognition now. But at the same time, I understand that there can be a danger to that, where it can become, the culture could become like a caricature of itself. But it's just like every culture outside of the US that has like imported or immigrated here to America to a certain degree, like they've become Americanized, you know. Like you think about like Vietnamese food, pho, like now everybody thinks about just pho as when you think of Vietnamese food, when there's so much more to Vietnamese cuisine and or like banh mi's. The same thing with like Thai food, like pad Thai. Like people just think of pad Thai as the quintessential Thai food, when in reality I actually believe, another fact check on me on this, but I actually believe that was like created as like a cultural vehicle to expand Thailand's cultural influence outside of Thailand.
Right. So things such as like fortune cookies from like Chinese Americans. Yeah.
So and eventually like it's gonna be
adaptations. Yeah.
I know there's like a lot of like discussion, and it's a hot button topic about like cultural appropriation and whatnot. And it's, to me, I look. I mean, if we talk about cultural appropriation, how about like Taco Bell in America?
Right.
Like maybe they're next. Like maybe Taco Bell is like the next list for people to.
But you know, there's also people who just get it completely wrong. Like people were so upset about Cracker Barrel. Like, did you hear about that?
No, I didn't know that. What was the deal with
Cracker Barrel? They were saying that Cracker Barrel is, well, you know, the derogatory slang towards white people would be cracker, because back in the slave owning days, people would whip crack the whips on slaves. Well, they're saying that Cracker Barrel inside of the barrel are like whips or whatever, and that it's a reference to sort of white supremacy. And then it was debunked completely. Like somebody was just like pulled up the history of what the context of Cracker Barrel is, and it has nothing to do with, you know, it has nothing to do with race or ethnic based things. But it's so, you know, sometimes people just kind of get it wrong just straight up, you know. But kind of because we were on this topic about cultural appropriation, I thought it would be interesting to get your take, because, and I think that this is more, I've experienced it as more of a FilAm thing than I have a Filipino thing, is about my channel name being Puting Pinoy, where some people would feel like, hey, that's appropriating or something. So I was curious about your thoughts on that.
I mentioned to you this before we started the live stream. Like I you know, even though I understand Tagalog, I actually didn't even know that was like white Filipino initially. Well, first of all, my reading comprehension isn't good in Tagalog. It's only my listening comprehension that's decent. Also, I actually like never hear like white in that like puting
NG connects it.
Exactly.
NG connects it.
So I didn't realize that, so I never really thought about that. But honestly, like to a certain degree, like I would say like you're more Filipino than me. You live in like the Metro Manila area. You speak Tagalog.
Lived in the provinces.
You lived in the province too. I've visited the province, but I've never spent extended time out there like you. And I am it just depends. If you were somebody who like just ate lumpia like a couple times and then just, hey, I love Filipino culture, I'm starting a channel called Puting Pinoy, and didn't know how to speak Tagalog at all you knew about like Filipino culture was lumpia, then I would say, all right, man, like you
there actually is legitimately a guy who did that. He was like, you know, in the days of transgenderism, I'm trans ethnic, and he was like, I'm Filipino, when he's clearly not ethnically. And it's funny because he was like, I'm going to do a reaction video on that. It's too funny, honestly. He's like saying that, he loves lumpia. He loves the tuk-tuk. What is it? The
Like
the tuk-tuk.
tricycle.
But yeah, that's Thailand. That's a Thailand thing. The tuk-tuk. It's like it's
that's why I
like a
have a
tricycle,
problem.
but it's right. So it's like that's so funny. I know that there are some tuk-tuks, like some people do use tuk-tuks in the Philippines, but like tricycle is what it is. It's a trike,
Yeah,
But
and if anything, if you're gonna reference like public transportation in the Philippines,
jeepney
you're
or
probably gonna reference
trike.
it like jeepneys first.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it's really, really, really funny. So yeah, and kind of something we were talking about with this is I myself have pretty strong feelings against appropriating, and I myself also would say that, if someone, like, for instance, you saying that I'm more Filipino than you, for me, I'm like, no. Like, I'm not, I don't want to claim that. I don't feel comfortable about that claim that I'm more Filipino than somebody who is ethnically Filipino, but I appreciate it as a compliment. I appreciate it as like you're being very accepting of me and being very kind towards me. So I appreciate that aspect, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't. Oh, is that guy from Florida? I don't know. We're gonna look it up though, Mahikampi. That's gonna be our next video. Okay, we're gonna do. I'm gonna do a video about that white Filipino guy who
I think
is.
I might have heard of this dude.
Yeah,
from my auntie actually.
Yeah, it's like got 1 million views or something. It was like 2 or 3 years ago that he did it. But let's see here. Let's take this question. How does our guest feel about Pinoy baiting? Disregard the comment if it's already answered. I was late to the stream, sorry. But I mean that kind of fits in, right?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit, and it's awesome. Like, I want to drive people over to my podcast. You can visit go to youtube.com, search the Video Craft Show. Actually, go into your YouTube search box and type the Video Craft Show Pinoy baiting, and there's some great commentary from Tom on there. If you've seen his video on it, it's great, but it's like an added like extra, I think, to what he discussed there. So that's an interesting take. But yeah, again, I touched on it earlier where it was a concept that was new to me until like I came across it in like a newsletter that I subscribed to.
Yeah.
And it fascinated me so much because it makes sense. Because I've known like how like technologically engaged the Philippines is, like as consumers of like technology. I remember going to the Philippines as a teenager in like the early 2000s and just seeing everyone texting like super fast on their like Nokia 3390s.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like,
I didn't start texting until I lived in the Philippines. My first text messages were in Tagalog.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
They're just so I was like, wow, okay, so this is kind of like that next evolution here. You're seeing that like translate over into like the new media platforms like YouTube. And it makes sense because everyone's always on their phone there. You're always on the phone because you're always sitting in traffic.
Right. I really like that. So this comment, how about you're more appreciative of Filipinos, Kukampi? Still uncomfortable? Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate so much about the Philippines. So here's something that I personally feel I want to talk about, think I should talk about, and I think other foreigners should talk about as well, is not everything is peaches when it comes to the Philippines. Not everything is so great and beautiful and whatever to where people are like, oh, that shocked me. That changed my life. That made me emotional. And it almost feels like people are purposefully avoiding learning about the Philippines. Like, it's like you can only learn so much before you have something like, okay, there is an issue here, and to discuss that. But they don't want to, and they avoid doing it because they know it could have repercussions for their audience. So for me personally, I don't like how people, and I do consider this very much Pinoy baiting, is people who They come here, they don't know the language, so they don't know the chismis aspects. They don't know, so they're going to only talk about the very positive things, and then they're going to benefit from it. But their reality, their understanding of the Philippines is not based in reality. It's based on a fantasy that benefits them.
Yeah.
You know, and for me, that's a big issue in my mind, because you should want somebody who's going to be genuine and going to be honest. And to a certain extent, if they continue to compliment and whatever, diba, we have the word sip, like suck up, like, you know, I think that that's detrimental as well. Kung gusto lang nilang magbigay purong papuri, no? So yeah, it's interesting.
It's very, I think, look, I work as a marketer as well. That's part of my role at Video Husky and other gigs that I work. And it's I had this interesting conversation with another guest on my podcast that will be coming out later. We were talking about marketing and how, you know, you sometimes cannot tell the difference between someone who has like good intentions and who has bad intentions, because like on the surface, like the marketing can kind of, you know, can kind of hide it if you use like the right words. Like if you know what like customers' pain points are, if you have like bad intentions, you can use that to your advantage,
to exploit it,
and craft a message that then like gets them to engage with you. And I think that's what you see with
Pinoy baiting.
You know, to a large degree. And it's hard because, again, on the surface, like you can't, sometimes it can be difficult to tell. I think generally speaking, you can identify it, but it's still, we're human beings. Like we're not infallible here. Like,
sure, definitely.
We think that we know, but like I'm sure that I've like misjudged many people on many different occasions.
You're right. Well, and you know, I've expressed this too, is that certain creators too, and you know, being a creator, you have insights. You know someone who knows someone, or you know someone directly, and you know their story, where you're not going to necessarily, out of respect, you're not going, and just I think professional courtesy, you're not going to just straight up oust somebody like publicly if things are, you know, there's a
proprietary.
Yeah, you know,
proprietary.
Yeah, there's a proprietary when it comes to being in this line of work, but you just know as a creator that there are certain people who may have 3 million subscribers and people love them for being so helpful to Filipinos and so genuine. But when you know the other side of it, the story, you're like, oh, are those really that genuine of motivations, or are they just playing it up, knowing that will be loved, and so they do it? And so something I also thought about, and something I really love about creators like Mr. Beast, is the transparency.
Yeah.
Like Mr. Beast is saying, hey, give us more subs. We're going to continue to do this content. Hey, we're doing this for views. People who say that straight up, it's just, it's a lot more noble to me than pretending that you're some like savior. Like, you know,
or like a guru or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it just is a little disingenuous, you know. But then you have people then who, you know, it can get into some dark and sad areas too, and you have people who are more genuine or something about it. But then they're being more honest, so they're not going to use the same tactics the other person is using.
Right.
You know, and so it's like it's really, really, really interesting. Like I've thought about that a lot too. I couldn't possibly make a video about my first time eating adobo, my first time trying Jollibee, my first time blah 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 blah, you know, because it would be dishonest. But so many people are using that. But then at the same time, I mean, there is this guy who he's a linguist. He's an American linguist guy. What's his name? Shaolin, anyway, something, and he speaks Chinese, he speaks, a few other languages, but he came upon Filipino things, and it wasn't the language, it wasn't Tagalog, it was halo. It was the halo, and Shaoma. He was like, hey, so he was at New York.
I know this guy, Xiaoman NYC.
Yeah, that's him, and he made this video. It's the Manhattan Jollibee, and he was like, hey guys, I just went to Jollibee for the first time, tried it, man, it's amazing. I got this dessert, it's called the Halo, and I want to go around and give it to Americans and like see what they think about the Halo. And I've been to that exact location, the Manhattan Jollibee location. That thing is not an effing halo. It's soft serve vanilla ice cream with like a little bit of ube. And, so it just goes to show like this guy is kind of even messing it up in a sense. He's not being genuine. What he's sharing with people and calling a halo is not a halo. And so to a degree, would that not be what we should call appropriating or Pinoy baiting?
Yeah,
you don't even know the facts about it. But yet you're going to get, I think he has 6 or 7 million views on that video.
Yeah. That's where it's so hard to tell too, because like I've watched that guy's videos. Actually, I quite enjoy his YouTube.
I enjoy
multiple. He speaks multiple languages. I know that he goes into like he's done videos where he just goes into Chinese restaurants and starts speaking Mandarin fluently, and shocks people, like the Chinese owners of those businesses. But like that's where it's like, how do you know? How can we be 100% certain that actually wasn't a genuine reaction? Like I that's where it's difficult.
And
I feel like
he can say, here's the thing I would go with that is like, okay, yeah, it's so it's and I've seen plenty of videos of his that I'd be like, okay, yeah, he is more genuine, I would feel.
Yeah.
But going for something like something he knows nothing about, but sharing it as if he does or something, I think that's where someone would be like, okay, he just knows that there's a market and he's exploiting that fact. And there have been times that I personally have been like, hey, this thing would be cool to do a video on. But then I'm like, actually, no, I don't feel genuine about it. Like, I think this would do well, but no, I'm not going to do it because I feel like it would be disingenuous or dishonest.
Well, I feel like the challenge for creators like yourself and anybody who does anything artistic, right, is like, you can have the best intentions with like a video you make or a blog post or an Instagram post or whatever. But then once you put it out into the world, it's no longer yours. And it's the audience's, and it's their interpretation of what you created. They're seeing it through their lens of perspective. Then that lens is like colored by like their own personal experiences that you didn't go through when you were creating that video. And so there's like some certain things like lost in translation there with that. And that's where you get this like miscommunication of like, oh, you said this, but I think you actually mean this or something like that. And it's hard again because we don't like, this is a new world that we're living in where before like there were like fail safes where in like journalism, for example, you have editors and whatnot like to double check, fact check that what you're saying is correct. But now like for example, you and I, we're on this, we're broadcasting. I imagine like this video will get on your channel with the amount of people who are watching it, like a couple 1,000 views or whatnot. But it's like there's no one like fact checking like everything that we're saying here if we're like 100% right. And so that's where you can have these situations where it's like you could take something that I said and say he's wrong saying this.
Right,
he's an
right.
idiot. Like, 'cause I'm just talking off the cuff of like what I know, and I don't have like all the information. I guess I could like Google search it in front of me on my computer, but that would like stifle
Well,
the
I think a lot-
conversation.
Yeah, well, a lot of what we're discussing is, from a personal perspective and things, which is, I think, more opinion-based things anyway. We're not spouting out like the, when the Magna Carta was signed or whatever, where there are hard facts,
Yeah.
But like, okay, isa lang nasa isip kong stereotype when it comes to FilAm. That they're rich because one of their parents is a foreigner. Ah, interesting. Well, there's FilAm, where there's the FilAms who are like Hapas, they're half Filipino, and then there's FilAm who are just simply Filipinos who are American citizens or live in the U.S. So that would be a stereotype. That's an interesting one. I actually made a video about that one too, stereotypes that Filipinos have about Americans. And oh man, no, not all Americans are rich, not by a long shot.
No, there are a lot of poor Americans actually. I mean, it's again, the wealth gap here in the US is, and again, like, yes, if a poor American person translated their salary and brought that to the Philippines, like, yeah, they would be living well. But the problem is they can't even afford to like buy a ticket to get out there, and their jobs don't allow them to, like, it's their location dependent jobs where they have to be, working like blue collar work at a factory or something like that, or whatever. It's just not, it's again, it's all relative too, relative to like where they are, the context, the country in which they're living in,
Right. Well, let's go ahead and we'll take a couple more questions, statements, and then we'll wrap up. Let's see here. Kakamping Nurse Candy. I think FilAm, as the people who grew up in the U.S., even if they're pure Filipinos, could be mixed race too. Yeah, true. I did a video that I haven't edited yet, but where I bought DNA tests for my FilAm friends, and the results were really interesting. I still got to share that video. I still got to put it together and edit it. But it's really interesting. Like, what is a Filipino? What is race? What is ethnicity? Like, those are interesting questions. This right here. When they discovered someone is half Filipino, they get hyped. Why is that? And I don't know. I personally get hyped. I personally get hyped if I meet a foreigner who speaks Tagalog. Like where Kakampi Jerry. Of course, you were born and raised in the Philippines, but he is Indian. He
that's
looks
interesting to me.
and he speaks perfect Tagalog. And I've had him on the show. I've had him on the channel. I get excited when I meet a fellow non-Filipino who speaks Tagalog. I get pumped about it. I think there's a little bit of a recognition that's exciting. And I think right about the representation as well, or the common bond.
The one thing that does trouble me, though, a little bit is just I feel like there is an elevation of a certain kind of mixed Filipino. So God bless them. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
The previous Miss Universes, right?
Right.
Catriona Gray, right? And then
yeah.
back. But they're mestiza. They're half Filipino, half white. And they get elevated. So there's still like this like inferiority complex, like, oh, we're gonna raise things, we like that they're a little bit higher than us because they have like white mix within them.
And that's a whole topic for discussion, like a whole other thing we could get into with like colorism and whitening products and things. But it's sana all tatanggapin nilang sariling beauty nila, like hopefully people would be able to just express, like, have that pride about how they look, and then to have that pride about how others look.
Yeah.
And for it to not be some sort of a standard that's
exactly
very limited.
Because there are other
limiting.
there are other talented, like half Filipino, but not half Filipino, half white, but like half Filipino, half black. I don't know how many of your viewers know the talented musician Her, Her, Having Everything Revealed. She's half Filipino, half black. She's like one of the most talented singers I've ever seen, you know, of this generation. And I love her because, one, she's Filipino and she wears that proud. Two, she's also from my hometown. Shout out Vallejo, California.
Oh,
she's
nice.
the most
Nice.
talented person to come out of that city. And she's already won like a couple Grammys. She won an Oscar recently for like doing the title track for that movie. I think Judah and the Messiah, I believe. I forget the name of that film that came
I gotta
out February.
watch that. Yeah.
But it was, you know, I just kind of wonder, like, is there, I asked some like Filipinos in the film, like, is there like hype around her, or like you got to think, I was wondering, are people like talking about her and, you know, excited about her in the Philippines? And they're like, no, they kind of just know her a little bit from from one song, but she hasn't really like caught steam yet here. And I'm like, how is that possible? And they explained why. And I don't want to go into it right now because it opens up a whole other can of worms. But I think we know where we're going with this.
Yeah, definitely. With the exception, like Apple Day App, I think is one of those exceptions. But still, it's like it's a rare thing.
Exactly.
It's a rare exception. Yeah, it's all related to colorism. Oh, hey, look. She's from Mindanao. And she says Her is one of her favorite artists. So
love it.
Very nice. Very nice. Let's support Rabia on Sunday. I hope we win. Yeah, well, mga kakampi, this has been a treat. This has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you being on. I loved having you on, John, and I guess we should be wrapping up. I wasn't really planning on whatever time for this, so I don't know how we'll do in our in our post publish of this, but I still really enjoyed it, and maraming salamat sa lahat ng mga tao na nandito. Oh, one moment, let's go ahead and take this last one. Are we backwards if we refuse to call ourselves Philippines? We talked about this a little earlier, but what's your answer there, John?
Yeah, I'm somebody who doesn't look. I've said earlier, like, these are new concepts to me that I'm like formulating my thoughts on, like, and I know that there are probably going to be some people out there who might hear this and might think, oh, well, you're ignorant. How do you not know this? Like, you need to be like championing this cause. And I'm like, I'm trying to learn about, these are just brand new concepts to me, and I'm still formulating my ideas on it. And I'm not somebody who like forces that upon your culture, because even though we have like this common thread of being Filipinos, you're still Filipino. I'm Filipino American. Like I come from a different culture, and I just am not, you know, a big fan of, I don't think that it's worthwhile.
There are cultural contexts. Yeah.
I just don't think it's worthwhile to be shaming people into guilting people into doing things, because like, are they then doing it because they want to out of their hearts, or are they just doing it because like they feel guilty, you know, and they're just doing it begrudgingly? Like, I'd rather have someone embracing something because it's something that they firmly believe in and that they embrace.
Right. Agreed. Really quick, let's take this comment, and then I'm going to do a shout out to our to my channel member supporters. Go ahead and do that really quick. Nurse Candy, maraming salamat sa pagiging loyal na kakampi, as well as Shira Joy Casamayor and Cherilyn Gunda. Mga kakampi, kung gusto nyong supportahan ng channel, you can also, aside from slapping the campana and the like button, you can also hit the join button. And there are options there with benefits attached, depending kung anong gusto nyo, which then support the channel itself. So if you're interested in that, maraming salamat at maraming salamat sa mga kakampi na sumasuporta ngayon. I think the Pinoy pride has gone too far because we badly wanted to be associated to that successful person, even though we didn't contribute to his or her success. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. And I feel like, for me personally, salamat kakamping Nurse Candy. For me personally, it's like what I said about, so when we're talking about YouTube creators and Pinoy baiting, when it comes to, I think of Japanese anime and then other things to come out of Japan. When there are people really getting super excited about this, is it because they want to impress Japanese people? Or is it because Japanese anime has taken on its own life and subculture that people really, really genuinely love in the tens of millions around the world? And I personally would hope that Filipino culture is not being loved just because people know that Filipinos want to hear nice things about themselves, versus there's something that has been created and the whole entire world just really, really loves it. You know, I would hope that the motivation for people to say nice things about the Philippines is not motivated by playing upon people's Pinoy pride, but because it genuinely is something that they love. And I feel, I've seen, I've witnessed, I know people who admit to it, that they do it a lot of times to play more towards the fact of Pinoy pride than genuinely loving a thing. And to me, I don't like that, and I don't want that to be the reason why people love things. At the same time, I'm happy for representation to happen more. I get excited. You know, Dante Basco, from the time I was a kid, he was the person I wanted to be. You know, I wanted to be Rufio. So,
did you ever end up watching the debut?
The debut of?
With Dante Basco. It was like his feature. It was like his main starring role. It came out.
Oh, really?
Have you you've never seen this movie?
I've never seen it. No, I've got to watch that.
Yeah, you got to watch this, man. This
Debut.
came out like I think in the early 2000s.
Oh,
it had
nice.
limited release, obviously in a lot of like Filipino FilAm markets here, but we were all like talking about, I remember that movie when it came out in high school, because we were like, oh shoot, it's Rufio. it's about our culture, like a cotillion. I think it was someone's cotillion or something like that. I'm pretty sure, but I don't remember like the details of the story. You should check it out. Was his starring role.
That sounds awesome. Well, mga kakampi, I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate you, John, for coming on. Please, mga kakampi, abangan ninyo yung video namin makasama sa kanilang channel, the Video Craft Show. Also, check out the other ones that he's done already. He has one with Finding Tom, and karamihan sa inyo dito, you guys know Finding Tom and the collaborations we've done. We drank together. That's a pretty funny video where we drank Filipino alcohol, you know. But yeah, thank you so much. Nandito kayo. Let's go ahead and, wag kalimutan na sampalin ang like at sampalin ang kampana, and please check out the Video Craft Show. Any final words, John?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, man. I mean, this is what I feel like is the beauty of the internet, is like you can watch somebody on a screen, and if you you can reach out, you can just shoot them an email.
It's so cool.
And follow up like multiple times, and then next thing you know, you're live streaming on you're on a YouTube channel with like 80,000 subscribers live streaming.
That's a very, very
about Filipino culture.
very, very specific story. That's very true.
But it's like one of these things, man, like during this time, right, of COVID, where you know, we could use these tools to connect with each other. I know there's a lot of discussion about how these tools are maybe like breaking us apart, but I think this is a prime example of how they bring people together too, because without
100%.
the internet, like you and I would have never met. So
yeah, exactly.
I appreciate you for having me on. And yes, if anybody wants to check out the show, you could visit www.videocraftshow.com. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is John Tiago with a 0.
Nice. Well, mga kakampi, please do so. Maraming salamat. Appear tayo.